Sri Lanka is in an economic turmoil at present, as the skyrocketing cost of goods has left people helpless. Why has Sri Lanka found itself in this situation? Those in power have often blamed the COVID-19 pandemic for the crisis in the country, but the claim is questionable, as Sri Lanka's South Asian peers have performed better economically. The Asian Development Bank has projected India's economic growth to reach about 7.5%, although the country dealt with a deadly wave of COVID-19. According to the ADB, Pakistan, which is grappling with a political crisis, is expected to record an economic growth of about 4%. The economy of Bangladesh is expected to grow up to 6.9%, Bhutan by 4.5%, Nepal by 3.9%, and Maldives, which relies heavily on tourism, by 11%. However, the Asian Development Bank's forecast for Sri Lanka is a paltry 2.4%. These factors leave us with a plethora of questions. Does this justify the blame on the COVID-19 pandemic? Or is it sheer economic mismanagement that has caused the crisis? Did the government make timely decisions when imposing and lifting restrictions at the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic? Were vaccines imported to the country before it was too late? Some officials spent many weeks believing that the Dhammika tonic and pots of holy water would be effective against COVID-19. Was a plan in place to resuscitate export industries that bring foreign revenue to the country? Do you remember how COVID-19 clusters were named after export businesses that bring massive foreign revenue? Apart from entrusting tourism in the hands of a few allies, what was the government's plan to uplift the industry as a whole? It is no secret that the import restrictions imposed to stem foreign exchange outflows ultimately benefited a few importers of sugar, coconut oil and garlic. Do you remember that cabinet proposals were tabled to import luxury vehicles for politicians, disregarding an import ban that was in effect? As Sri Lanka's economy continued to sink, the government made an overnight decision to ban the use of chemical fertilizer in mid-last year. The decision sparked anger among farmers, who then took to the streets. But the government proceeded to import nano-nitrogen fertilizer from India, rubbing salt on the wounds of the agriculture industry. In the same sequence of events, the government paid more than $6.9 million for a Chinese organic fertilizer shipment that was never unloaded. A state-run bank also saw itself mired in controversy during the transaction. The government lost about 600 billion rupees in revenue after it decided to slash taxes immediately after coming into power. What followed was a massive printing of money. Central bank officials, including Professor W.D. Lakshman, the governor at the time, strongly disputed the decision to print money. The objection was made, citing that money printing can cause the cost of goods and services to increase. On September 15, 2021, Ajit Nivad Cabral, who was serving as a state minister, was appointed as the governor of the central bank. He insisted that money printing would not cause inflation and that there were sufficient dollars in the country. Ultimately, the central bank's foreign reserves continued to deplete as it maintained a cap on the exchange rate of a dollar to 202 rupees. Economic experts repeatedly called on the government to allow the exchange rate to float and to seek the assistance of the International Monetary Fund to restructure Sri Lanka's debt. However, neither the central bank governor nor the finance minister Basil Rajapaksa seemed to comprehend the gravity of the situation. Eventually, the lack of foresight caused the country's foreign reserves to dwindle to $1.5 billion. The central bank managed to top up its reserves up to $2.5 billion by obtaining $1.5 billion from China under a swap exchange facility. However, Sri Lanka's foreign currency reserves now stand at less than $1 billion. At the peak of the economic crisis, the central bank in March decided to allow the exchange rate to float. However, it did not instill enough confidence among expatriate workers. Sri Lankan workers did not remit money to the country through the banking system, as they received a higher exchange rate in the grey market. And today, the dollar is selling at more than 320 rupees. But this has not been effective in preventing remittances through informal channels, as the dollar is trading at about 400 rupees in the grey market. The rapid depreciation of the rupee, measured at about 60%, has taken a toll on the cost of goods. Foreign suppliers are increasingly reluctant to export fuel, milk powder and gas to the country on credit. Ultimately, authorities are now relying on spot purchases when importing these commodities instead of long-term supply contracts. The last few months have seen people in queues to purchase essentials. Is COVID-19 to be blamed for this crisis? Or is it mismanagement that has left the country in limbo? How can Sri Lanka overcome this crisis? The government has now decided to approach the International Monetary Fund for assistance. The first meeting between the IMF and the Sri Lankan delegation is to take place on the 11th. While there is no ministerial cabinet, the people have lost faith in the political leadership. There seems to be no future plan for the government either. Against such a backdrop, will the International Monetary Fund help Sri Lanka out of this crisis by offering dollars? It must be kept in mind that the IMF isn't Santa Claus waiting to give away billions of dollars just because one wishes for it. The IMF is a serious economic union and will work with serious governments with serious conditions. Had Sri Lanka approached this months earlier, the pain on ordinary people would be a lot less. But as with everything else, incompetence, corruption and arrogance took pride of place over intelligent decision making. Today, we are left with no choice but to go to the IMF on our knees. Sri Lanka has to repay $6.9 billion in debt this year. The government has to incur about $300 million to import fuel monthly. It needs more dollars to import essentials like food and medicines. Will the assistance of the International Monetary Fund help the country? Sri Lanka has already obtained a $1 billion loan from India and has approached the neighboring state for another $1.5 billion loan. The government has also received an extension to repay a $250 million swap to Bangladesh and has sought another $250 million from them. A request for $200 million has been made from Pakistan as well. China has said it will provide Sri Lanka with $2.5 billion. However, each of these loans have their own conditions. The Hambantota port and the Colombo port city have already been vested with China. The government has already given India 3 islands in the north, the Trincomalee oil tank farm, a land in Sampur and also a project to build a maritime rescue coordination center. How long would Sri Lanka be able to survive like this? Is the country facing the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic? Aren't we facing the repercussions of mismanagement? This is not a statement against this government or that government. This is a statement of fact. Let's not forget the bond scam that destroyed the people's trust in a government elected on the basis of good governance. Those who defended the bond scam then don't have a leg to stand on today, and the people know it. Today, ultimately, ordinary Sri Lankans are paying the price. A steep, painful, heart-wrenching price.